one of the functions of government regulations, government interventions of one kind or another, is to bring the two into alignment. And to the extent that governments are successful in bringing them into alignment, then businesses can play a very important role in the promotion of development. To the extent that they fail, it can have a very negative effect on development. And a lot of what has happened in the last 10 or 15 years is a fight between businesses, particularly businesses whose interests are not aligned, to make sure that regulations are not passed, and the rest of society to try to tame the businesses to bring them into alignment. So as one thinks about the issue, you could look down various sectors and various kinds of firms and ask the question. In some cases, the alignment is much closer, and in other cases, it's much further apart. One of the reasons I say different kinds of firms, because there are some firms that are, you might say, more tamed by concern about reputation than others. So take in one area natural resources. The publicly listed companies have been quite good in getting good websites, showing that they are very responsible, a little bit less responsible than their websites would have you believe. But the private companies, like Ivanhoe, which is a very big private mining company, tends to be absolutely despicable. And one of the interesting things is the good public companies actually have been asking for strong regulation, because they know that they can't get away with the kinds of bad behavior that the Ivanhoe can get away with, and they believe that that the competitive advantage of the private company is leaving pollution behind, destruction behind, and they can't do that. So they want a level playing field, and so one of the drivers for good regulation happens to be, I think, some of the publicly listed companies. I was, just as an example, I was in a meeting with the Premier of China with one of the big mining companies, and he began his discussion saying we need much stronger environmental regulations. And I was at first a little bit surprised, because it wasn't the usual shtick you hear from mining companies, but he said, really, and I asked him afterwards, why did you say it? And it was exactly the point that I gave. At the other extreme, there are some new business models that are being developed of companies that are trying to be explicitly focused on social responsibility, and saying that we want to our returns are social returns as well as economic returns, and that there are lots of people who are willing to invest, not lots, but a few people willing to invest money getting returns that are lower, undertake higher risk, but knowing that there are social returns. There was a little bit of, there was a supplement to the FT about a week ago on some of these. The one that got the highest rating was a fund called Acumen that supports private investment in a number of developing countries that I've been on the board. And then at the other extreme, I mean, another new corporate form, or you might say corporate form, a new form, are the sovereign wealth funds, which are funds owned by governments that have another reputation concern. They obviously don't want to do things that their citizens are angry about, and feel like they have even more sense of corporate social responsibility because they are accountable in a different context. There are some very good sovereign wealth funds, like that of Norway, which is explicitly in its charter pushing issues of good corporate governance, good environment, and so forth. But even other ones, like in China, are much more aware of the notion of corporate social responsibility. So that's, want to just emphasize the importance of different organizational forms affecting the extent to which they promote development. If we look across sectors, I think we see some sectors where the interests are more likely to be aligned, some sectors where they're not, and some of the factors that David identified were some of the factors that play a role. But for instance, in natural resources, the alignment often is very bad because you have strong incentives to bribe governments. It's a lot easier to minimize your costs by bribing the government than paying market prices. And much cheaper. Those who go into corporations will find that out. And here government regulation can make a difference. The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in the United States has tied the hands of American companies. When I was chairman of Council of Economic Advisors in the United States, I pushed for anti-bribery laws to be passed by all the countries. And it was very, very striking how many countries in the OECD very much opposed these anti-bribery laws. They say it will give us, it will hurt our businesses because it takes away an instrument of government policy, of economic policy. I think that's an example where explicitly businesses undermine well-functioning undermine democracies and have effects that are not only bad for the economy but for society. Finally, so one has to think about those broad range of issues. Finally, well, let me just mention different companies have different business models where externalities may, in some cases, promoting development can be a very positive one, and there's some agriculture, take even agriculture. There are a couple very successful British companies that have based their success on smallholder tea growing and have been very effective in promoting, you might say, development capacity at smallholders. On the other hand, there are companies like Monsanto who I might think almost broad consensus have had a very negative effect on development for a whole variety of reasons we can talk about later. Finally, let me just emphasize, I talked about rules and regulations as part of the taming of corporations and trying to align interests. The WTO has been playing a very negative role in making it more difficult to do this. And in that sense, international rules have made the challenge of aligning these more difficult. A particular example is there are cases where domestic purchase requirements, learning requirements, domestic hiring requirements, that could be an effective way of making sure that foreign direct investment has a pro-development impact. There's an attempt by the WTO to restrict these kinds of actions. So, because WTO is not pro-development, it's been very anti-development on the whole. So, I think when evaluating the question, one not only has to look at the regulatory policies within the country, but also internationally. Finally, one more thing, which is the international financial markets have, as we list the sectors, probably played a very negative role. The short-term international capital markets of creating instability, which and short-term promoting short-termism, which is contrary to long-term development strategy. So they promoted opening capital markets. That opening of capital markets have facilitated high degrees of instability and short-termism, and that has been very anti-development. So some of the particular policy frameworks that have been promoted by certain sectors, I think, have had a very adverse effect.